Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is drgdsharma and you are watching Eliot, and today we are going to deal with some of the most important questions on tseliot. These questions will have their detailed explanation in the form of some lesser known facts. This will be quite helpful for all those aspirants who are preparing for NTA-NET examinations and TGT and PGT examinations. So let's start the video. The very first question is, which of the following poems depicts the disillusionment of a generation? Is it Gerontion, the Four Quartets, Ash Wednesday, or the Wasteland? And the correct answer is, it is the Wasteland. It shows the disillusionment and disintegration of human values in 20th century. As far as the poem is concerned, the Wasteland, it was first published in 1992 in the magazine The Criterion. The Criterion was his own founded one. Eliot founded this journal, The Criterion. It was then published in The Dial. The Dial is a quarterly review. The Wasteland is a very famous poem and it is a landmark in the modern poetry. It has 5 sections: The Burial of the Dead, A Game of Chess, The Fire Sermon, Death by Water, and What the Thunder Said. There are many cross-references in this poem used by T.S. Eliot. So it was Bonney and Liveright edition of 1922, where it was first published with T.S. Eliot's own notes. First to include Eliot's own notes. And these notes are very much helpful in order to understand the various examples and cross-references, allusions, quotations. Eliot himself described these notes a remarkable exposition of bogus scholarship. In these notes, Eliot has shown his indebtedness to the Grail legend or vegetation ceremonies, James Fraser's The Golden Bough, and J.L. Weston's From Ritual to Romance. These two books, The Golden Bough and the From Ritual to Romance, are very much important from the point of view that Eliot took many references from these two books. The poem is a statement of the post-war sense of futility. It is a landmark of modernism, original voice speaking through many echoes and parodies of echoes. Eliot himself says about this, it could be seen not as much an important bit of social criticism, but as a relief of personal and wholly insignificant grouse against life. It is just a piece of rhythmic grumbling. Eliot expresses the hopelessness and confusion of the purpose of life in this poem. The poem proceeds on the principle of rhetoric discontinuity that reflects the fragmented experience of 20th century. Gerontion was published in 1920. It is a dramatic monologue and it is written in free verse. Gerontion is a Greek word that means little old man. So the poem is an expression of opinions and impressions of an elderly man who describes Europe after World War I through the eyes of a man who has lived the majority of his life in the 19th century. So a person who has lost everything, who has lost a sense of existence, and he sees the world of 20th century. So Gerontion is an expression of that person's opinions and impressions. Initially, this poem was to be the preface of The Wasteland. Actually, in the starting, T.S. Eliot wanted this Gerontion, this poem, to be the preface to this longer poem, The Wasteland. But he dropped the idea as was suggested by Ezra Pound. Gerontion opens with an epigraph from Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. Thou hast nor youth nor age, but as it were an after-dinner sleep, dreaming of both. So these are the lines from Measure for Measure of Shakespeare, and they are the part of the epigraph that opens this poem, Gerontion. Anthony Julius, who has analyzed anti-Semitic rhetoric in Eliot's work, cites Gerontion as an example of a poem by Eliot that contains anti-Semitic sentiments. Actually, it is criticized for its being anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic sentiments mean the hostility to or prejudice or discrimination against the depiction of Jews in the poem. So T.S. Eliot seems to be very much hostile, very much against the depiction, the description of Jews. So on that point, it has been criticized. And many other works of T.S. Eliot have been also criticized for its being anti-Semitic. Four Quartets is a poem in 4 parts. As the title suggests, 4 quartets. It was published in 1943. The 4 parts are Burnt Norton. It presents the imagery of Cotswold, garden. So the scenery and the settings have been taken from Cotswold. Second part is East Coker. It is set in Somerset Village. Third part is Dry Selvage. It mingles the scenes and sceneries and landscape of Missouri and New England. And the fourth part is Little Gidding. It is inspired by the landscape and history and surrounding of John's Church. Little Gidding. Little Gidding is the name of the place, Cambridgeshire. So you have to remember the very order of these four parts. First is Burnt Norton, second is East Coker, third is Dry Selvage, and fourth is Little Gidding. And their localities or the locals presented in the poem is also very much important. These four quartets represents four seasons and four elements. Four elements like air, earth, water, and fire. So these four elements have been dealt with in this poem. And all these parts deal with the time present and time past. As they were written during World War II and the air raids on Great Britain, they are seen as the unifying force in the war years. They communicate in modern idiom the fundamentals of Christian faith and experience. These four quartets are four interlinked meditations between the common theme being man's relationship with the time, the universe, and the divine. There is a reference of Bhagavad Gita in this poem. George Orwell did not seem to be liking this poem and he criticized this poem. Ash Wednesday was published in 1930. It was published after his conversion to Anglicanism. So he was primarily a Roman Catholic person and then he converted into Anglican one. So this poem is sometimes called conversion poem. The poem is in 6 parts. The poem deals with the struggles of a person who primarily had no faith in the religion and he strives or struggles to move towards God. It is based on Dante's Purgatorio. So the source of this poem is Dante's Purgatorio. So the theme is spiritual barrenness to hope for human salvation. Edwin Muir suggests Ash Wednesday is one of the most moving poems he, Eliot, has written and perhaps the most perfect. Second question is T.S. Eliot wrote his PhD thesis on A.C. Bradley, F.H. Bradley, William James or Jean-Paul Sartre. And the correct answer is he wrote his doctoral thesis on F.H. Bradley. F.H. Bradley was a British philosopher, idealist, school philosopher, and his philosophy is based on his doctrines on the thought of Hegel. He considered mind to be a more fundamental feature of the universe than matter. T.S. Eliot was born at St. Louis, Missouri, educated at Harvard, the Sorbonne and Merton College, Oxford. So he pursued his doctoral thesis on the philosopher F.H. Bradley. The topic of his research was knowledge and experience in the philosophy of F.H. Bradley. So this was the topic of his doctoral thesis. He completed his doctoral dissertation in 1916 and it was accepted by Harvard University. But he did not complete the university's requirements for the degree. So his thesis was accepted but he was not given the degree because he did not comply with the university's requirements for the degree. A.C. Bradley, as we have heard most often, that he was the best of critics on Shakespeare. And his Shakespearean tragedy, it is a landmark book in the field of literary criticism on Shakespeare. It is the psychological analysis of Shakespeare's characters. This book anticipates post-Freudian criticism. William James was an American philosopher, psychologist, and a leader of philosophical movement of pragmatism, and the founder of the psychological movement functionalism. Principles of Psychology was his important book. Jean-Paul Sartre was a French novelist, playwright, and exponent of existentialism. So philosophical movement existentialism was great deal to Jean-Paul Sartre. His philosophy acclaims the freedom of individual human being. Jean-Paul Sartre was awarded Nobel Prize in 1964. But he denied. So this fact is very much important. Next question, which of the following plays of T.S. Eliot is not a comedy? So is it Cocktail Party, Family Reunion, Confidential Clerk, or The Elder Statesman? Correct answer is it is Family Reunion. That is not a comedy. It is a tragedy. And tragedy of revenge. It is a tragedy of revenge. So T.S. Eliot wrote two tragedies. One is Family Reunion and the other is Murder in Cathedral. Apart from these two tragedies, he wrote all comedies. It was published in 1913, modern variation on Orestes' story. So it has Greek theme. Orestes was the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. So Clytemnestra with her lover cheated Agamemnon. Agamemnon, when he returned from the war, was deceived, was killed by Clytemnestra and her lover. So Orestes, with the help of Furies or the goddess of revenge, he avenged on Clytemnestra. So he took the revenge of his father's death. So the Greek theme has been dealt with in this Family Reunion. It is the only play in which the Furies make a brief appearance. It is important question. It has been asked variously. So in which plays of T.S. Eliot the Furies make a brief appearance? So it is Family Reunion. Family Reunion and the Modern Cathedral, they are both Christian tragedies. There is a use of chorus in the manner of Greek drama to make apprehensible to the common humanity the meaning of heroic action. And who are these Furies? Humanities. The Furies, Humanities, the avenging Furies. They make a brief appearance in this play. It is written in blank verse. It is important thing. The play incorporates the elements of Greek drama and the mid-20th detective plays, mid-20th century detective stories. So the elements of Greek drama and the elements of mid-20th century detective stories have been incorporated in this play, The Family Reunion. The play portrays the hero's journey from guilt to redemption. Cocktail Party is a verse play. It was published in 1950. It is notable for its secular character. It is based on Alcestis of Euripides by Euripides. It's a kind of morality play which has been presented as a comedy of manners. It is Eliot's most commercially successful play. Confidential Clerk was a comic verse play published in 1953 and it is also based on Greek drama. Elder Statesman is also a comic verse play. It was published in 1959 and it uses the parable of prodigal son. Next question, which of the following T.S. Eliot's books is accepted as a classic among books of poetry or for children? So is it what is a classic? Four Quartets, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, or is it Ash Wednesday? And the correct answer is C. It is Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. It is a collection of light verse of light poems. So light verse is a poetry that attempts to be humorous or frivolous or serious. They are usually brief and they deal with the light subjects, the subjects which are very much appropriate for the children. It is important from the point of view that Andrew Lloyd Webber, he wrote his classical musical Cats on the basis of this book. It was written under the name of Old Possum. Old Possum was the pen name of T.S. Eliot, which he used very infrequently. Only for once or twice he used this name. So Old Possum is T.S. Eliot himself. The first poem is Naming of Cats and the last poem is Addressing of Cats. What is a classic is a presidential address delivered to Virgil Society in 1944. It was published in 1957 in the volumes of essay on poets and poetry. So in the volume of essay on poets and poetry, it was published. It was a critical essay. So this is a thought-provoking essay in which Eliot expresses his views on the distinguishing features of classic art and literature. The classic in what is classic stands for standard author. So the title means what is standard author or who is a standard author. So what is classic? Four Quartets is based on musical pattern. It is Eliot's masterpiece. It addresses the connection of the personal and historical present and past, spiritual renewal, the nature of experience. It is Eliot's clearest exposition of his Christian belief. So somewhere it is related to his conversion or religious beliefs. East Coker examines the nature of history and spiritual renewal. The important lines of this section are: for us there is only the trying, the rest is not our business. Burnt Norton is a meditation on time and eternity. And some of the very frequently quoted lines are: time present and time past are both perhaps present in the time future, and the time future contained in the time past. So these lines are asked many times. So first they are from the Four Quartets and second they are from the second section, Burnt Norton. Little Gidding is a study of human experience and Christian faith, and it also deals with the nature of time and history. The fourth section of this poem, Dry Salvage, resumes the theme of time and history, and here the time refers to the formation of rocks near the Cape Ann. The poem concerns with the experience and the human response to Christian doctrines. Next question is, T.S. Eliot's poetry is a revolt against traditional poetry, study in cultural history, an appraisal of romantic poetry, or an attack on Elizabethan poetry. And the correct answer is, his poetry is a revolt against the traditional poetry. T.S. Eliot was very much against the kind of poetry that was being written prior to him. So his objective was to do something innovative, as the modern age was an age of innovation. So he wanted to do something experimental and innovative, new, hard, ambiguous, and that suited the psyche of the modern man, the fragmentary nature of human being in 20th century particularly. And all these features make his poetry against or a revolt against traditional poetry. His poetry is satiric, allusive, cosmopolitan, lyric, elegiac. It has influence of French poetry, particularly Jules Lefebvre. So the poetry of Jules Lefebvre had a great influence on the poetry of T.S. Eliot. His first volume of verse was published in 1917. That was Prufrock and Other Observation. So this is important thing. Which was the first poetic work of T.S. Eliot? It was Prufrock and Other Observation. That was published in 1917. He was an assistant editor of the journal Egoist. The Egoist. He founded the Criterion and he was assistant editor in this journal, The Egoist. Second volume of poetry was Poems, 1919. The speciality of this collection was that it was hand printed by Hogarth Press by Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf. Leonard Woolf and Virginia Woolf hand printed this collection, the poems that was published in 1919. His poetry is a voice of disillusioned generation. So in his journals and through his critical observations, T.S. Eliot helped establish the reputation of Elizabethan and Jacobean dramatists and poets. He was particularly interested in metaphysical poets, and he also wanted to diminish the authority of Milton and the Romantics. He was against Miltonic and Romantic poetry. He changed the canon and created an environment in which modernist innovation could be treated seriously. As I told you in the beginning, that he wanted to create an environment for the poets to do something modernist, to do something innovative. In his critical essays in Metaphysical Poets, he argues that the modern poet must be difficult and must be more comprehensive and elusive in order to force to dislocate language into his meaning. In the essay For Lancelot and Rouse, that was published in 1928, he describes himself as the classicist in literature, a royalist in politics, and Anglo-Catholic in religion. So we are very much aware about this criticism, but where did this quotation occur? So it was none other than T.S. Eliot himself, who declared himself a classicist in literature and a royalist in politics and Anglo-Catholic in religion. It occurred in the essay For Lancelot and Rouse. About his poetry and his poetic sensibility, his friend Ezra Pound in a letter declared that he has actually modernized himself on his own. Next question, who was it that viewed the Wasteland as the longest poem in English language because of its profundity, perplexity, and density of poetic allusions, myths, and meaning? So who was that critic? Wasteland is a landmark poem of T.S. Eliot. So there have been many critical comments by many eminent writers and critics. So who was that eminent writer or critic? Was it Ezra Pound, Wyndham Lewis, William Empson, or none of the above? So it was Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound is the person to whom the Wasteland has been dedicated as Il Miglior Fabbro. It is Italian term which means better craftsman. The Wasteland has been dedicated to Ezra Pound because Ezra Pound made very constructive changes to this poem. Because of his advice or suggestion, the length of the Wasteland has been substantially cut. Initially it had 800 lines, but they were reduced to 433. It was in Valery Eliot's edition. So here in this book, the Wasteland, the facsimile and transcript of original draft, we do get the idea of Ezra Pound's suggestion and how it worked. Ezra Pound suggested many times the original draft of the Wasteland has been substantially edited, and because of the suggestion of Ezra Pound, that Gerontion that was supposed to be the preface of the Wasteland was removed. At the end of the editing, Ezra Pound said that it was about enough to make the rest of us shut up shop. He further says that the poem is the finest experiment of modernist movement. Wasteland was parodied by H.P. Lovecraft. The title of this book was Waste Paper, a poem of profound insignificance. So here in this book, the Wasteland was parodied, satirized. Next question, The Hippopotamus. Poem by Eliot is a satire on the church, the animal, the poets who took trivial subjects for poetry, or the poets of nature. And the correct answer is, it was a satire on the church. It was published in 1919 in the collection Poems. It was a second collection of poems of T.S. Eliot, first being Prufrock and Other Observations, and the second collection of poems was Poems. It was written shortly after the conclusion of World War I. The poem uses satirical humor to compare the Christian church to hippopotamus. The poem shows a comparison between innocence and the truth of hippopotamus and the hypocrisy and corruption of the Christian church. T.S. Eliot pokes fun at the Christianity and reveals his own views on religion. In the poem, hippopotamus made a journey to heaven while the church remained left behind. As far as the comparison is concerned, so there is a comparison on the bulky size of hippopotamus and the Christian church. So T.S. Eliot shows that hippopotamus is simple, honest creature. He finds his own means of survival and support on his own. If he has a bulky weight, so he finds the means of survival himself. While the church is basically handed into living by donors. So church has on the one side bulky size, just like the size of hippopotamus, but on the other hand, it is nurtured, nourished, sustained by the donors. It has no substantiality or no means of survival on its own. So there is a comparison between the innocence of the animal and the corruption of the church. As we can see in these lines, the hippopotamus day, it passed in sleep, at night he hunts. God knows in a mysterious way. The church can sleep and feed at once. Next question, which play of T.S. Eliot was an experiment in modernist playwriting or modern playwriting? So was it Sweeney Agonistes, Murder in Cathedral, The Hollow Man, or Sweeney Among the Nightingales? And the correct answer is, it was Sweeney Agonistes. It was the first attempt at writing verse drama. So prior to T.S. Eliot, the playwriting or drama writing was mainly in prose. It was in the hands of T.S. Eliot that it underwent a change, and he wanted to do something in verse. He wanted to write drama or plays in verse. And the culmination we can find in Modern Cathedral. But it was for the first time in Sweeney Agonistes. It was first published in 1932. It was published under the title Sweeney Agonistes, Fragments of an Aristophanic Melodrama. So initially it was published under the title Sweeney Agonistes, Fragments of an Aristophanic Melodrama. The character Sweeney has been used in many other dramas and poems by T.S. Eliot as well. He was used in 4 poems prior to this Sweeney Agonistes. First, he was used in Sweeney Among the Nightingales. Second, Mr. Eliot's Sunday Morning Service. And third, Sweeney Erect. Sweeney Agonistes can be found presently in the collected poems of 1919 and 1962 under the title Unfinished Poems. So presently Sweeney Agonistes can be found in this collection, collected poems. And in this collection it is found under the heading Unfinished Poems. So in one way, Sweeney Agonistes is an unfinished poem. And Sweeney as a character appears for the 4th time in Sweeney, the Fragments of Agon. So Fragments of Agon was published prior to this Sweeney Agonistes, in which Sweeney the character was there. Murder in Cathedral is a verse drama, and it was based on the assassination of Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket. Primary source of this play was writings of Edward Grimm. He was a clerk who was one of the eyewitness to the event. When Thomas Becket was being assassinated, so this clerk Edward Grimm was present, and whatever he noticed at that time he wrote down in his writings. So T.S. Eliot's plot based on this source. The play primarily deals with an individual's opposition to authority, deals with the characteristics of an individual person when he is in opposition to the authority. Sweeney Among the Nightingales is a short poem or quatrains poem. Some poems T.S. Eliot wrote in quatrains. Quatrains means a stanza of 4 lines, rhyming AB, AB. So some of the light poems or short poems T.S. Eliot wrote in this meter, quatrain. So Sweeney Among the Nightingales is one of them. Its epigraph has been taken from Greek tragedy Agamemnon, and it refers to the cry of the dying king who is betrayed and struck a mortal blow by his own queen, Clytemnestra. So the epigraph points to the plot and the betrayal. Actually, nightingales, who are the nightingales in the poem? They are prostitutes. Prostitutes who try to seduce Sweeney. And in their seduction, they try to plot against his life. Something they are hatching a conspiracy against Sweeney. So Sweeney represents a modern man who is sexually degraded and uprooted urban person. The poem consists of 10 quatrains. The title of this poem has been taken from Bianca Among the Nightingales by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Bianca Among the Nightingales was the source of the title of Sweeney Among the Nightingales. Hollow Man is an overlapping and fragmentary poem. It is concerned with post-World War First. It is divided into 5 parts of 98 lines. The final stanza of this poem is probably the most quoted stanza of any 20th century poet who has been writing in English. When the poet says, "This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper." So these are the 4 lines that are most quoted lines. So they have been taken from this poem, The Hollow Man. The title is formed by the combination of the romance, The Hollow Land of William Morris and The Broken Man of Rudyard Kipling. So the hollow has been taken from Hollow Land and man has been taken from Broken Man. The Hollow Man. Next question, in which Eliot's poem is the theme of Ash Wednesday repeated, continued and expanded? So the same theme has been used in Ash Wednesday and the same theme has been repeated, expanded and continued in one of these poems. So it is aerial poems, 4 quartets, Hollow Man or choruses from the rock. And the correct answer is it is in 4 quartets that the theme of Ash Wednesday has been expanded, continued and repeated. Actually Ash Wednesday, 4 quartets and Hollow Man, they share the same theme. But the answer is only 4 quartets because Ash Wednesday was published in 1930. Hollow Man was published in 1925 and 4 quartet was published in 1935 and 42. So first of all the theme was developed in Hollow Man and then it was carried forward in Ash Wednesday and then finally it was culminated in these 4 quartets. So the theme is T.S. Eliot's pilgrimage towards his own particular brand of high Anglicanism, and it can be charted in his poetry through Hollow Man with its broken declaration of faith, through Journey of Magi and Ash Wednesday, and its culminating vision in the 4 quartets. So the poem Ash Wednesday expresses the pangs and strain involved in the acceptance of religion or religious beliefs and religious doctrines and disciplines. So it is the struggle and the pain when one has to undergo the conversion. As I told you before that Ash Wednesday is also known as conversion poems. So it was written after T.S. Eliot was converted into Anglicanism. It was first of all discernible in Hollow Man and then it was developed in Ash Wednesday and finally it culminated in 4 quartets. The common theme in all these poems is Eliot's poetic persona one who has lacked faith in the past and has somehow found the courage through spiritual exhaustion to seek faith. Eliot's aerial poems are the collection of poems that were written for Faber and Faber's series of aerial poems. The poems in the collection are The Journey of Magi, The Song of Simon, Animula, Marina, Triumphal March, and The Cultivation of Christian Trees. So these are the poems that were published under this title, aerial poems. All these poems except Triumphal March. These poems were published in collected poems as well. So the same poems that were published in aerial poems have been published in collected poems as well. Except this poem. The Triumphal March was published only in aerial poems of Faber and Faber. The Rock is a peasant play and it was written in collaboration with Martin Brown, E. Martin Brown and R. Webb Odell. So Eliot's contribution was less in this drama, The Rock. And Choruses from the Rock is a poem attached to it. It was published in 1935. It was published in 1934. And the Choruses from the Rock, it was published in his collected poems as well, separately. So it was a prophetic poem in a century that saw the application of innovation explode upon the world. And the last question is, who said that the Wasteland is a crossword puzzle of synthetic literary chronology and spurious verbal algebra? Actually, this kind of criticism was negative in nature. So Wasteland was criticized as well for its being too ambiguous to be comprehended easily, as it had many allusions and cross references and quotations from various other sources. And T.S. Eliot wanted it to be a difficult poem. His task was to compose something that is difficult. So on these grounds it has been criticized as well. So who was the critic that criticized this Wasteland in such a way? So was it F.R. Lewis, Wyndham Lewis, Ezra Pound or I. Richard? And it was Wyndham Lewis. Ezra Pound was the man to whom this Wasteland has been dedicated. And Ezra Pound made many substantial changes to this poem. The original title of the Wasteland was He Do the Police in Different Voices. So this was the original title of the Wasteland prior to its being suggested by Ezra Pound. So when the manuscript, the original draft of the Wasteland was handed over to Ezra Pound to be edited, it was titled He Do the Police in Different Voices. F.R. Lewis also commented on this poem. He says that the unity of the poem aims at is that of an inclusive consciousness. The organization it achieves may by analogy be called musical. So he was hesitant to praise this poem. Still, he just did it. He includes this poem in high modernist canon. So very few poems they fit in this high modernist canon, and among those Wasteland is one. And according to F.R. Lewis, the poem shows a rich disorganization. F.R. Lewis also juxtaposes the urban environment of the poem with an anthropological theme from pre-urban culture. He appraises the poem and exalts the poem, calling it a great positive achievement. So in the vein of F.R. Lewis, I. Richard also commented variously on this poem, The Wasteland. He called the poem the music of ideas and poetic shorthand. He also says that the poem is a perfect emotive description of state of mind which is probably inevitable for a while to all meditative people. W.H. Auden also said about T.S. Eliot in his obituary notice that Eliot cannot be imitated, only parodied. So this is all for now. Hopefully this video has added something to your existing knowledge, and if you really like this video, do share this video among your friends, among the aspirants who are also preparing for TGT, PGT and NET examination. Like this video as much as possible, and subscribe the channel if you have not subscribed it so far. So till then, keep learning, stay motivated. Thanks for watching.